The sad story of a girl who has to pay off her father's debt by surrendering herself to a loan shark. With the three of them, they slapped and pushed the girl into the middle of the street, making her a spectacle for the townspeople. He handed over his business card along with the office address after the girl promised to pay the debt in 2 days. Unexpectedly, Tae-sang couldn't bring himself to ruin the future of the girl he once pitied, so he refused her offer to stay the night and told her to go home. The next day, he instructed his subordinates to visit the girl and give her a bank book that she could use to pay for her tuition. The girl refused the gift. However, Tae-sang insisted and promised that he would send money every month if she was determined to study and truly wanted to change her fate. Tae-sang seemed to be tired of living a life that didn't align with his conscience. Apparently, he wanted to leave the gangster world. Because he failed to teach Tae-sang a lesson, the gangster boss kidnapped the girl and held her hostage to force Tae-sang to sign a cooperation contract. Tae-sang was willing to suffer severe injuries from the boss's attack. At that moment, the girl managed to escape while Tae-sang lay helpless. Shortly after, one of his most loyal subordinates came to help. 7 years later, Tae-sang succeeded in achieving success by establishing a financing company called Golden Tree. None of this would have been possible without the role of Kanggi, one of Tae-san's most loyal subordinates. 7 years ago, Kanggi was the one who played a crucial role in saving Tae-san's life. Kanggi was willing to be arrested by the police for taking the life of a gangster boss to help Tae-sang. Kanggi only wanted his loyalty to be repaid with a proper education for his younger brother named Jahi. He even made Jahi one of his trusted people. Meanwhile, 7 years have passed, but Midu still hasn't been able to fulfill his dream. He didn't use a single penny of the money he got from Tae-sang for college expenses. Instead, Midu works as a waiter in a restaurant. He is solely focused on earning money for his father's hospital bills and helping his family escape the grip of poverty. Midu's applications to broadcasting companies have yet to be accepted. With the help of a friend, Midu managed to get into a party, hosted by a boutique owner. Midu intends to reveal that the boutique owner is the blue-blooded match of a wealthy person. He will also seek information related to Kon Lam-rat, who continues to manipulate stocks. Unexpectedly, Kon Lam-rat's child, who was present at the party, recognized Midu as a waiter from a restaurant he often visited. He then insulted Midu for being an uninvited guest. Their altercation was witnessed by all the guests. They did not expect that Midu would have the courage to confront Kon Lam-rat's child's actions. The next day, Kon Lam-rat's child sought revenge by visiting the restaurant where Midu worked. They reported to the manager about Midu's poor performance. He was given 2 options: kneel and apologize or pay for all their orders. Midu didn't have that much money, but he didn't want to hurt his pride by apologizing for something he didn't do. As he was about to kneel, Midu's arm was held back by Tae-sang, who happened to also be at the restaurant. Tae-sang was willing to pay for all the food ordered by Kon Lam-rat's child and pulled Midu away from the place. Tae-sang didn't expect to meet Midu in such a situation. He was a bit disappointed because Midu didn't use the money he sent to continue his higher education. Midu was actually puzzled because Tae-sang kept being kind to him as if he had his own intentions. Tae-sang didn't just want Midu to be humiliated in front of the restaurant patrons.
모른 척 하려고 했는데 안 됐어.
In the middle of their conversation, Songju came along, who is the ex-girlfriend of the late gangster boss. Since dating the gangster boss, Songju secretly liked Tae-sang. Songju's feelings were unrequited, but she didn't want to be far from that man. She then invited Tae-sang to be friends up to this point. Seeing Tae-sang's behavior towards Midu, Songju became convinced that Midu was the person who had always been in that man's heart. In her feelings, Songju felt jealous because she couldn't make Tae-sang forget his past. On the other hand, the incident at the restaurant made Midu decide to quit her job. Tae-sang tried to find out her whereabouts and help ease her burden. Midu was uncomfortable with Tae-sang's constant help. If Midu objected, Tae-sang asked her to repay him by working at Golden Tree. According to Tae-sang, recruiting Midu was the best decision. The girl was very smart and had potential, so it would be a waste if Midu only worked as a restaurant waitress or a low-level employee.
닥치고 갚아. 여기서.
Midu's presence made Taesang more enthusiastic about working. From now on, Taesang will see Midu more often. The invitation felt like an insult to Midu. She wasn't that desperate to get money. Midu also hadn't forgotten how Taesang and his friends treated her family before. Feelings of sadness and shame still lingered in her heart, especially since then, Midu's life has always been haunted by Borok's dream.
남자랑 돈 때문에 결혼한 여자가 되긴 싫어.
Taesang admitted his mistakes, but from their first meeting, he was determined to change. Taesang is fixing his messy life to win Midu's heart. Taesang's feelings are sincere, and he has always been thinking about the girl. He apparently wants to make up for all his bad actions by taking care of Midu and providing her with the comfort she has never had before. Unfortunately, the proposal was rejected by Midu. She promised to return everything Taesang had given her by diligently working at her company. Midu doesn't want to rush into making a decision so she won't regret it later. She wants to heal the emotional wounds caused by Taesang and get to know him better.
받아들일 수 없습니다.
As time goes by, Midu understands Taesang more and more. It turns out Taesang had the same fate as hers. No wonder the man helps teenagers who struggle to afford their education. Taesang is highly respected by the employees because he always treats them very well. He is also known to be generous and impartial. It was proven when Taesang gifted Midu a travel ticket under the guise of a business trip. He hoped Midu could have fun and learn many things in the country she was visiting.
주눅 들지 말고 돈 걱정하지 말고.
That hope was fulfilled because Midu was extremely happy. She thoroughly enjoyed the trip and considered it a valuable experience. Midu intended to inform Taesang, but unexpectedly, her call was answered by Seongju. Midu then hung up the phone feeling both angry and jealous. She decided to turn off her phone and go for a walk. Unexpectedly, the map story she dropped was found by Jahi. As fellow South Koreans, Jahi was happy to recommend places that Midu should visit. Midu even spent a lot of time with the man. They engaged in various fun activities, and upon reflection, it turned out they knew each other. 7 years ago, they once stood in line to get free rice. Even though it was only once, their meeting was quite memorable.
학교에선 이런 미인을 못 봤는데 이상하다 했죠.
Midu was amazed by Jahi's fate because they both started as ordinary people living in poverty. But now Jahi has become a successful and established man. Meanwhile, Midu is just treading water, while Jahi admits he reached this point because he received help from someone. The time they spent together made the seeds of love begin to grow in Jahi's heart. He also hopes to deepen his relationship with Midu.
종을 치면 사랑이 이루어진대요.
Meanwhile, due to a misunderstanding, Midu hasn't been answering calls from Taesang. That line was followed by Taesang, who couldn't wait any longer to explain everything. Taesang's invitation for dinner was rejected by Midu because she had plans with a friend she just met. Taesang didn't mind and was willing to reschedule.
일정이 좀 바뀌어가지고.
Without Taesang knowing, the person Midu was referring to is Jahi. On the other hand, Midu begins to feel doubt in her heart. Unexpectedly for Midu, two good men come into her life. Both men meet Midu's dream criteria. Jahi is a very pleasant person, someone who can always be relied upon when Midu is feeling sad. Meanwhile, Taesang is a simple and naive man. In fact, Taesang doesn't know how to treat women properly, although Midu can understand the reason. However, it doesn't change the fact that Taesang plays a significant role in Midu's life. Everything Midu has achieved, including her work experience at the company and traveling abroad, is thanks to Taesang. She also needs to be more realistic because this mindset is necessary to navigate an increasingly tough life. After careful consideration, she decided to accept Taesang's invitation to dinner. Midu wants to appreciate the kindness and sincerity of that man. However, it doesn't mean that Midu doesn't like Jahi, because 3 days are not enough for her to conclude her feelings for that man. Perhaps what Midu is feeling right now is temporary. She just needs an outlet after being disappointed by Taesang. As she was about to enter the restaurant, Midu caught Taesang with Seongju. She listened to their conversation clearly, and from what she gathered, Taesang did not expect Seongju's presence. As soon as her presence was noticed, Midu immediately left, going down the stairs. She didn't want to give Tae-sang a chance to explain anything. That night, while walking around the hotel, Midu accidentally saw Tae-sang swimming. Midu noticed a scar on the man's back, which immediately reminded her of the incident 7 years ago. She was sure that the scar was from when Tae-sang saved her from a gangster boss attack. Bravely, Midu approached Tae-sang and asked him about it. Tae-sang tried to cover it up and instead brought up the misunderstanding that happened at the restaurant. Midu thought that Sung-ju was Tae-sang's girlfriend. She felt played, so Tae-sang tried to explain that he didn't care if Sung-ju liked him, because he liked Midu more. Without them realizing, Sung-ju was actually listening to their conversation.
보고서 잘 쓰고 잘 자.
Meanwhile, Jahi intended to express his feelings to Midu. He had prepared flowers and a gift for the girl. Unfortunately, Jahi's hopes were instantly dashed. When Midu chose to return to South Korea, Midu did enjoy spending time with Jahi, but she couldn't continue their relationship. Jahi was very disappointed and sad because everything didn't happen as he had hoped. Midu was the only woman who could make Jahi fall in love, so he felt extremely heartbroken. Jahi was not giving up on winning Midu over. He decided to return to Korea and work at Tae-sang's company so he could meet Midu again. On the other hand, for the first time, Tae-sang visited Midu's house. He was warmly welcomed by Midu's mother, who hoped her daughter would marry him. Tae-sang was treated to a family meal that made him very satisfied. He was so happy because it had been a long time since he had eaten such food. He also shared his background story of being abandoned by both his parents and his younger sibling. Since then, Tae-sang had to take on illegal work to survive. Tae-sang had no place to rely on. He also never had a relationship with anyone, so he didn't know what to do for the woman he liked. Tae-sang admitted that he liked Midu and asked for permission to date her.
진지하게 만나고 싶다는 걸 부모님께 말씀드린 겁니다.
Mr. Kyung Wook-tak disagreed because he believed that Tae-sang was not suitable for his daughter. Tae-sang was indeed wealthy and successful, but the age difference between him and Midu was significant. Tae-sang had also once deeply offended Mr. Kyung Wook. Liao still couldn't forget the way Tae-sang had treated him in the past. For Midu, the age difference wasn't really a barrier as long as Tae-sang was sincere and willing to take responsibility. Midu thought more realistically and believed that Tae-sang fit the criteria she was looking for. Midu didn't want to live a difficult life like before, so she wanted to try dating a wealthy man. Midu didn't deny that she needed a lot of money to live decently.
억지로 만나는 거 아닌데요?
All this time, he has been struggling to achieve it, and now it's time for him to experience a happy life. He also wants to elevate his parents' status. However, Lord Kyung-wook disagrees, even though his wife actually supports their relationship. Mrs. Sonai even provided a sample ring for sizing if Tae-sang intends to buy a ring for her daughter.
이게 뭡니까?
미도가 멋으로 끼던 반지.
Meanwhile, Jae Kian Sumringa was reading a quote on the blackboard in front of the Midu bookstore. Apparently, Jae had once shared that quote with Midu, leading him to believe that the girl wrote it because she missed him very much. That night, Jae accidentally ran into Midu on the street. Midu never thought she would meet Jae again. He then apologized for his sudden departure when they were in Hong Kong.
다시 보게 될 줄 몰랐어요.
Midu admitted to liking another man. She even refused to go home with Jae and chose to take a taxi to avoid that man. Unexpectedly, Jae had already arrived in front of Midu's house first. Jae asked about the quote on the blackboard, but Midu felt she had never written it there. Midu tried to deny it, but Jae gently kissed her, which left Midu very shocked. Their actions were unexpectedly caught by Midu's sister. Midu kept complaining because her sister allowed Jae to kiss her when she already had a boyfriend. Unexpectedly, Tae-sang overheard their conversation. He had apparently been waiting for Midu inside the store for almost half an hour, and Midu was unaware of Tae-sang's presence. She only found out about it from her mother.
지금요? 온 지 한 20분 됐나?
Midu felt a bit worried, fearing that Tae-sang might have heard or even seen what she did with Jae. When Midu approached, Tae-sang did not show any disappointment or bring up the matter. Instead, he admitted to having written a quote from the book Midu was reading on the chalkboard, which had caused Jae to misunderstand. The next day, Midu warned Jae not to repeat his actions from the previous night. He didn't want Taesang to misunderstand, and Jae was also careful with Taesang because the man could guide Midu's heart. However, he said, he was willing to follow Midu's wishes. Before parting ways, Jae encouraged Midu to pursue his long-held dream of finding a director. On the other hand, Kengi Ajinio was released after spending years in prison. Kengi was joyfully welcomed by Taesang, who was eager to employ him. While choosing a suit in a store, Kengi was surprised by the arrival of Youngcap, who was accompanied by the late boss Gangstar. Youngcap tried to sow discord between Kengi and Taesang. He felt that all this time, Kengi had been made a scapegoat by Taesang. Kengi wasn't influenced at all, but he was offended when Youngcap mentioned Jahi's name, who could attend a prestigious school without knowing his brother's sacrifices. Kengi then hit Youngcap in a burst of emotion. Unexpectedly, the store's TV side had recorded his actions. Youngcap's report was immediately processed by the police, and Kengi was arrested on suspicion of assault. Upon learning of this, Taesang couldn't hide his anger. He was calmed by Sonju, who promised to persuade Youngcap to withdraw the report. Youngcap was willing to accept an apology from Kengi, as long as Sonju agreed to go on a date with him. She knew that Sonju was doing all of this, just for Taesang. Sonju had to remember Youngcap's words from before, that he would never give up until he could win her heart. Youngcap would resort to any means, including taking someone's life if anyone dared to disrupt his plans. Sonju was forced to comply with Youngcap's demand to kiss him. At that moment, she tried to resist, but she couldn't match Youngcap's strength. Sonju actually felt very uncomfortable and hoped that moment would disappear from her memory. Youngcap's decision to withdraw the report made Taesang happy. He felt indebted to Sonju for helping to ensure that Youngcap didn't press charges against Kengi. Unexpectedly, the next day Youngcap came to Golden Tree with several guards. He forced Kengi to apologize in front of the company's employees. At that moment, Kengi tried to hold back his anger when Taesang was also asked to kneel to receive forgiveness from that man.
한태상 사장은 무릎 꿇고 하세요.
Kang's anger reached its peak, especially when Youngcap brought up the death of the gangster boss and how he was being scapegoated. Midu didn't want Taesang to follow Youngcap's words, so he intended to call the police. Before he could do it, Midu's body was suddenly pushed by one of Youngcap's guards. Seeing this, Taesang delivered a punch to the perpetrator, and a fight broke out. Taesang managed to block every punch, but he was eventually overwhelmed by several guards and couldn't control the situation. Midu then attacked the guards because he couldn't stand witnessing it, but he ended up getting slapped. Taesang could no longer hold back Kang and rained punches on the guards who slapped Midu. The scene traumatized Midu, as it reminded him of an incident from 7 years ago. He was afraid that what he didn't want would happen again. After the fight ended, Kengi regretted his actions. He should have been able to control his emotions over Youngcap's words. Taesang didn't make an issue of it, and instead asked Kengi to meet Jahi immediately.
쟤한테 가봐.
After not seeing each other for so long, Kengi and Jahi expressed their longing with a hug. So overwhelmed with emotion, Jahi couldn't hold back his tears. The two of them exchanged stories about feelings that were so joyful. The next day, Jahi was introduced as the new director at Golden Tree. Midu was so surprised when he found out about it. On the other hand, Jahi was equally surprised to see that Midu was working at Golden Tree. Midu never expected to be reunited with Jahi as a colleague. The two of them pretended not to know each other in front of Taesang and the other employees. The opportunity to meet again was used by Jahi to spend more time with the girl. At their last meeting, Jahi didn't have the chance to tell Midu about his plans. Jahi had returned to South Korea and worked at Taesang's company. Even though, in reality, his chances of working at a foreign company were very high, Jahi took that step to repay Taesang's kindness for funding his education. Midu seemed incredulous upon hearing that statement. It was a coincidence that Jahi never expected to happen in his life. It turned out that he wasn't the only one who received a scholarship from Taesang.
나도 장학금을 받아서 왔다고 해두죠.
Meanwhile, Taesang kept his promise to treat Sonju to dinner. Expected to be a romantic dinner, Sonju was disappointed because she wasn't the only guest invited. Jangi and Donggu were also present there. At that moment, Songju tried to appear fine so as not to disrupt the atmosphere.
한 사장이랑 창희 씨가 더 어려 보이는데.
When about to be driven home, Songju found a pair of rings in Taesang's car. In her heart, she hoped that the beautiful rings were prepared for her. Songju felt both sad and angry when she realized that she had no hope at all of being by Taesang's side. Even though her feelings had never changed from the beginning, it was futile for Songju to beg for false hope because Taesang was never willing to give it. The man had completely given his heart to Midu.
일부러 보란 듯이 날 차에 태워요?
Taesang was even willing to do anything for that girl, including playing the piano. He got information from Mrs. Sunny that Midu liked men who could play that instrument. Initially, Taesang was enthusiastic about touching the piano he had just bought. However, the object eventually reminded him of his mother, who was the one who introduced Taesang to the piano. It had been a long time since Taesang had seen his mother. And it turned out that all this time he had never tried to find his mother, nor had she tried to find him.
학원에 여자애들만 있단 말이야.
Without Taesang knowing, his biological mother had opened a small shop to make a living. Mrs. Hongja spent her old age full of regret. She didn't want her existence to be known by Taesang because she felt ashamed of her past mistakes. The presence of Taesang's uncle further disturbed Mrs. Hongja's life. He was asked not to tell anyone about her whereabouts. If he insisted on telling Taesang, then Mrs. Hongja wouldn't hesitate to eliminate him. Mrs. Hongja realized that Bakak wasn't concerned about her, because the only thing Bria wanted was money. Bakak considered Taesang, who is now successful, as a cash cow.
20여 년 만에 온 동생한테 꺼지라니까 서운해서 그렇지.
Ignoring the warning from Mrs. Hongja, one day she recklessly went to the Golden Tree office to meet her nephew. Fortunately, at that time Taesang was not there, as he was spending the weekend with his family. He invited her to go to his hometown, where Taesang showed her his home, school, and the places he used to visit.
나도 그땐 다녀오겠습니다. 그 말을 했었는데.
In the past, Taesang was an extremely happy man. He had many friends and always got perfect scores in every subject. Taesang thought his life would go according to his expectations. However, in reality, he had to go through sharp twists and turns, and everything got worse after he lost his mother and sister. One day, Mrs. Hongja left with someone she loved, and sometime later, Taesang's sister disappeared. Taesang was convinced he would be reunited with his sister. Throughout their journey, Taesang realized that Mihidu was in a bad mood. The girl refused the ring he gave her, because Taesang didn't talk about the incident the other day. Mihidu was actually scared when she saw Taesang violently beating the young boy. She felt doubtful and uncomfortable about being in a relationship with him. Instead of addressing it, Taesang just got angrier because he felt he couldn't understand Mihidu's feelings. He knew that all this time Mihidu was forced to be in a relationship with him.
여자들은 뭐가 그렇게 복잡해?
Taesang tried to lower his ego to apologize, because he acted violently right in front of Mihidu. He wore one of the rings and handed the other to Mihidu. Taesang gave Mihidu the freedom to do whatever she wanted with the ring. Mihidu felt guilty for only seeing the bad side of Taesang, even though he had done many things for her. The next day, Mihidu decided to use the ring given by Taesang as a necklace pendant. Taesang felt relieved when he saw Mihidu wearing his ring, especially since there was a problem occurring at the office at that time. The video of Taesang's fight with Cap had apparently spread on the internet. As a result, the investors withdrew their funds. Fortunately, a CCTV recording was found showing Cap's henchman pushing Mihidu before entering the Golden Tree office. The recording could be used as evidence that Cap and his gang started the fight.
그러니까 미두 씨 액션이 좋았을 때.
From the employees, Jahi was informed about the cause of their fight, which was Kung's anger that erupted because he was insulted by Cap. The employees still didn't know that Jahi was Jengi's younger sibling. Jahi became increasingly curious about why Jengi was in prison. With a heavy heart, Taesang explained that Jengi had saved his life. Jahi concluded that Taesang was repaying Jengi's deed by supporting his education.
그래서 절 후원해 주신 거예요?
Taesang denied this, as he had always considered Jengi as a brother and did it sincerely. Meanwhile, Jengi met with Cap without Taesang's knowledge. He wanted to resolve the issue amicably so it wouldn't negatively impact the company. Cap took advantage of Jengi's short temper to provoke a commotion. Jahi tried to remain calm when Hyun Recap threatened to tell Jahi.
한테 사이 때문에 네가 살인을 했다는 걸?
Jahi didn't want Jahi to lose his dreams because he had a brother who was a former convict. Jahi also pleaded with Hyun Recap not to bother Tae-sang anymore. He wanted them to stop having disagreements and go their separate ways. Meanwhile, Midu wanted to keep his relationship with Tae-sang a secret from the employees. However, Tae-sang wanted to introduce Midu to Jahi. Initially, Midu refused Tae-sang's invitation to go to his house, but after some thought, he agreed. Sooner or later, Jahi would definitely find out about their relationship.
어차피 언젠가는 알게 되지 않겠어요?
그래도
Tae-sang reconsidered the reason for Midu's rejection, and he abandoned the idea of inviting the girl to the company party. He was afraid that the party might make her uncomfortable working with her boss's boyfriend, so he decided to go alone. This made Midu even more troubled because she was hiding everything from both Tae-sang and the party. The next day, Uncle Baiko visited the Golden Tree Company for the second time. He acted as if he cared, but Tae-sang was fed up with him. Tae-sang became even more annoyed when Uncle Baiko brought up his mother. Uncle Baiko was willing to find Mrs. Hongja as long as he was rewarded by Tae-sang. At that time, he was out of money because he had lost at gambling. Tae-sang refused because his heart was still traumatized when he remembered his late mother. Uncle Baiko was asked not to meet Tae-sang again, but that only made him angrier. Uncle spoke with a threatening tone that made Tae-sang unable to hold back his emotions.
너 사람이 아주 망해먹었구나.
나가라니까!
At that moment, Midu took the initiative to cheer up Tae-sang, who was not in a good state. He invited the man to go to the night market and enjoy everything there. After Tae-sang's emotions calmed down, Midu asked about Uncle Baiko. Midu seemed very worried, but he could understand if Tae-sang wasn't ready to talk about it yet. Meanwhile, Jahi was introduced to Song Yun, who was none other than the child of a conglomerate who had previously clashed with Midu. Song only had a good plan regarding that. Jahi tried to appear enthusiastic, even though Song could sense the aura of pretense in his eyes. Song knew that Jahi still very much hoped for Midu. Midu's rejection didn't make Jahi give up. Instead, he did everything he could to get closer to the girl, including buying her a beautiful pair of shoes. Before he had a chance to give the shoes to Midu, Jahi's mood changed after bad gossip about him spread. Jahi heard unpleasant social rumors from the employees of Golden Tree. They were afraid if Jahi was employed there because he was a former convict.
난 저분 우리 회사에서 일할까 봐 불안해요.
That assumption made Jahi daydream all day. He felt worried, sad, and angry at the same time, but didn't know what to do. At that moment, Jahi needed someone to talk to. Jahi thought of Midu, who he believed could understand his feelings. However, the girl didn't answer the phone, so Jahi decided to go to her house. Unexpectedly, Jahi saw Midu and someone else being affectionate. His heart seemed to stop beating instantly, unable to believe what he saw. That reality made Jahi's heart feel like it was being stabbed repeatedly. He went home with mixed emotions. If the person he saw with Midu had been someone else, Jahi wouldn't have felt this hurt. Now, Midu's past words felt like a whip. Jahi was also unsure if the happiness Midu expressed to him was truly from her heart. Jahi returned home in a gloomy state, which made Jahi worried. Jahi didn't answer his sister's questions directly. Instead, he intended to discuss Kangi's closeness with Tae-sang. After so long, it's time for Kangi to reveal what he has been hiding. His closeness with Tae-sang began when Kangi worked as a subordinate to the moneylender. Kangi was forced to do that job because he was not an educated man. Kangi felt a connection with Tae-sang because neither of them had a place to lean on. As time went by, they grew close, and Kangi considered Tae-sang like his own family. Kangi's explanation made Jahi not want to betray Tae-sang. He tried to avoid Midu while at the office. Even when Midu apologized for being late in seeing Jahi's message. Jahi's attitude was unusual, as he seemed indifferent and unenthusiastic. Midu noticed Jahi's behavior was different, but he didn't know the reason. Midu regretted not answering Jahi's call last night. Jahi was always there for Midu and encouraged her not to give up on her dreams, especially since she wanted to study abroad. Jahi was slightly cheered up when attending the welcome party for the new rector. Both he and Midu had fun as if their experiences in Hong Kong were happening all over again. The next day, Kazan faced rejection from investors due to the spread of the fight video. They considered Golden Tree to be a company with a bad reputation. Golden Tree also couldn't rely on loans from the bank. Young Cap had provided false information to them to further tarnish Golden Tree's image. Taesang's patience seemed to have vanished, but he wouldn't act recklessly.
중요한 건 그게 아니지.
He intended to confront Young Cap, who played a significant role in causing this problem, and Taesang threatened to sue Young Cap for embezzlement against the gangster boss. Young Cap kept denying it, but Taesang had enough evidence to prove it. The threat made Young Cap tremble because he was scared. Meanwhile, Mi-juin was hooked on the subdaking provided by his friend. Mi-juin's friend happened to work as a server at Madame Hongja's eatery. The recommendation from his friend led Mi-juin to invite his group of friends to eat at Madame Hongja's eatery. And unexpectedly, Mi-juin's fans and his friends followed, making the place crowded. Madame Hongja was worried because she wanted her business to remain low-key. Seeing the panic on Madame Hongja's face, Sungjak, who happened to be eating there, immediately took action. He spoke kindly to Mi-juin, asking them to share. On another occasion, Mi-juin came with Madame Sunai to eat at the place. Madame Sunai praised Madame Hongja's cooking, saying it was very delicious, but the woman seemed to have a strange personality. Unexpectedly, Uncle Biko came and caused a commotion. Madame Hongja was annoyed and threw money at the troublemaker. Seeing this, Madame Sunai felt sympathetic.
괜찮으신 건가요?
On the other hand, Taesang received information from Kengi that Jahi seems to have a girlfriend. Kengi found a pair of women's shoes still neatly wrapped in his brother's room. Kengi suspected that the item was a gift Jahi intended to give to his girlfriend. At the office, Taesang teased Jahi about it. Jahi explained that his girlfriend's shoes were damaged. Jahi's approach was imitated by Taesang, but he mistakenly chose the wrong shoe size for Midu. The mistake was not an issue for the girl. She still accepted Taesang's invitation to spend the weekend out of town. Taesang looked happy, because now he could joke and laugh freely with Midu. Such a moment had never been imagined before. He always looked forward to having a woman who could make him forget the past. Taesang felt it was time to talk about marriage. He was ready to propose to Midu. And upon hearing this, Midu tried not to show her surprise. She didn't know how to respond to Taesang's words. Midu was sure that Taesang would be a good husband, but she wasn't ready to answer his question yet. There were still many things Midu wanted to do before getting married. She wanted to be truly mentally prepared when that day came.
남편이 될 거야. TT는 좋은 사람이니까.
On the other hand, Young Cap was angered by Taesang's last threat. His life was in shambles and he had no one to rely on. Young Cap tried to contact Songju, but as expected, she refused to accompany him. Feeling frustrated, Young Cap called Dongku to invite him for a drink. Like Songju, Dongku also declined Young Cap's invitation. It turned out Dongku was thinking of ways to make money because he had suffered losses from playing the stock market. He then asked Jangi for help to borrow money from Taesang.
제이도 능력 있고 하니까.
Jangi was angry with Dongku because he hadn't learned from his mistakes, even though he had failed many times. Dongku felt burdened because he was the breadwinner of the family. He was just a poor man from the countryside with no education. Dongku felt that his loyalty all this time was not appreciated by Taesang. When Jangi was in prison, Dongku was the only one serving Taesang, yet he wasn't bought a luxurious house. Jangi was willing to exchange the house given by Taesang because he didn't want Dongku to be ungrateful. Instead of giving in, Dongku became even more demanding. If he had known it would end like this, he would have preferred to take Jangi's place back then. Meanwhile, Songju planned to bring some meat from Mrs. Hongja's stall for Taesang. When visiting Taesang's house, Songju found the man preparing for the arrival of a special guest. Songju was convinced that all the preparations were for Midu, but he seemed not to care. He chose to serve the food he brought so that Taesang could taste it right away. The taste reminded Taesang of the homemade dishes his mother used to make. Songju felt happy seeing Taesang eat the food with such enthusiasm. At the same time, Midu called Taesang, and Songju deliberately shouted so that Midu would know he was at Taesang's house. Fortunately, Midu didn't misunderstand and agreed to accept Taesang's invitation to his house. The next day, Taesang referred to Midu as a heartbreaker. He had already made sure his house was clean. All the cooking ingredients were also arranged in the kitchen so he could prepare a big meal for Midu.
어릴 때 좀 배우다 말았는데 피아노 좋아해가지고.
Midu then went to wash her hands so she could help Taesang cook. On top of West towel, she found a bracelet belonging to a woman. Unexpectedly, Sangju came to retrieve her forgotten bracelet. The atmosphere became very awkward, but Taesang quickly eased the tension. From her expression, Midu looked upset because Sangju's presence ruined their moment. Midu began to suspect that Taesang and Sangju's relationship was more than just friends. Taesang explained that he and Sangju had nothing going on, but at that moment, Taesang was quite pleased to know that Midu was jealous. Taesang calmed the jealousy by asking Midu about Midden's progress. Midu then shared that her friend who auditioned had been fired from her job. Since long ago, Midu's friend had wanted to become a singer but was hindered by financial constraints. Taesang commented on it as a careless attitude and said Midu shouldn't follow it. Midu then became encouraged to express her true dream. Perhaps all this time Taesang thought that Midu's dream was only hindered by financial issues.
편하게 친구들 만나고.
In fact, for a long time, Midu has aspired to become an art director. This desire grew even stronger after Jahi put up a poster of Liju, who is none other than Midu's idol art director, in front of the bookstore. Jahi also asked Midu to attend a seminar by Liju. So excited about this opportunity, Midu ended up dropping her dream notebook on the bus. She only realized it when she arrived at the office, even though she wanted to show Liju's autograph to Jahi. Without a second thought, Midu immediately went to look for her dream notebook at the bus terminal. She entered each bus there one by one. Midu was surprised by Jahi's presence, who had found her notebook. Midu was very grateful to Jahi for being willing to help. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation was overheard by Taesang. Taesang quickly avoided being seen by them, not expecting what he had overheard. Taesang didn't know that Midu was that close with Jahi, and thinking about it made Taesang stressed to the point where the wound on his back started to hurt. Taesang wondered why Midu didn't ask for his help to find the dream notebook. He was sure this had something to do with the incident at the office earlier that day. Taesang responded to Midu's jealousy excessively. Taesang was also offended because he was accused of giving false hope to Sungju. Apparently, he had made a fatal mistake by snapping at Midu without considering her feelings.
처음부터 나랑 어울리는 사람이 아니었어.
One day, it turned out that Midu was intentionally introduced to Galaju by Jahi. Jahi did this to please Midu and to rekindle her dreams that had been overshadowed. Jahi felt that it was the right time to admit that Kangi was his biological brother. Midu apologized for having spoken poorly about Kangi due to her ignorance. Kangi is not a frightening person. He was imprisoned because he saved someone. Anyone would have done the same if they were in Kangi's position.
제 친형 이창이에요.
The next day, Jahi offered Sungjun to invest in Golden Tree. Sungjun agreed to persuade his father if Jahi treated him to a meal. Unexpectedly, Sungjun saw Midu's presence. He then badmouthed the girl in front of Jahi. According to him, Midu is just a poor, arrogant, and gossipy girl. Sungjun was willing to invest if Midu was fired. However, Jahi refused that request. Jahi instead defended Midu and showed his dislike towards Sungjun.
내가 아끼는 팀원이고 유능한 사원입니다.
At that moment, Jahi's face was splashed with a drink by Sungjun. Seeing that, Midu didn't stay silent. She grabbed a pitcher of water and was about to pour it on Sungjun. Jahi admired Midu's very brave attitude. He was convinced that Midu was a strong girl with great ambition. Jahi just needed to dry his wet clothes, because soon they had to attend a meeting.
TV에 찍힌 거 인터넷에 뜨면 어쩌려고 그래요?
Thinking about the meeting made Midu a bit anxious, and she finally shared that she received an interview call from the Kalaju company, which was scheduled at the same time as the office meeting. She had always dreamed of working at that company, and Midu had even applied there long before she started working at Golden Tree.
지원서도 내고 여러 번 찾아갔었는데
Jahi helped Midu so she could attend the interview. Jahi made an excuse that Midu was carrying out a task he had given her. Midu felt very relieved after the interview. At that time, Midu was accepted and would start working next month. However, she was a bit hesitant because she owed a debt to Taesang.
나 이 회사에 빚진 것도 있고.
On the other hand, Taesang felt as if Midu was avoiding him. Midu even declined Taesang's dinner invitation because she had plans with Jahi. This must be related to the misunderstanding earlier in the day, where Midu caught Seongju removing a bandage from Taesang's back. Taesang ended his friendship with Seongju because he didn't want Midu to misunderstand. Seongju tried to accept Taesang's decision, but on the other hand, he was also angry about being treated this way.
속으로 좋아하는지 당신이 어떻게 알아?
After leaving Seongju's house, Taesang decided to wait for Midu at the bookstore. He intended to apologize for making the girl feel uneasy. Midu eventually confessed about the interview she had done. She asked Taesang for permission to work in London. Taesang wanted to support Midu's dream, but he was afraid of being separated from her. Taesang then asked Midu not to go. He didn't want to live a life full of waiting like before. Moreover, he had planned to propose to her soon.
빚을 갚는 이유도 있었잖아.
그건 핑계고.
Midu was confused by this. She asked for time to think about it. Midu felt that her thoughts were not aligned with Taesang's. In her opinion, Taesang was very selfish and considered Midu's dreams meaningless. Unlike Jahi, who was willing to do anything so that Midu could achieve her dreams.
좌절을 하고 오더라도 안 가고 후회하는 것보다 훨씬 나아요.
After considering, Midu's decision to work in London is now firm. She indeed owed a lot to Taesang, but she also didn't want to lose her ambition in life. Midu has decided to end her relationship with Taesang. She wants to determine her own path in life. Although it's difficult to do, there must be sacrifices to achieve something desired. Midu feels very guilty, but working abroad has been her dream for a long time. She doesn't want to miss a great opportunity. Midu also promised to repay her debts to Taesang.
이제 우리 그만 만나요.
Taesang, on the other hand, was angry because he never brought up the issue of debts. He concluded that all this time, Midu didn't truly love him. On the other hand, Uncle Baichel came back to the Golden Tree to ask Taesang for money. He claimed that Mrs. Hungjo was hospitalized and needed a significant amount of money.
그 태상이 돈 왜 아직 안 보냅니까?
Knowing this, Kanggi insisted on investigating the certificate, given by Uncle Baichel. He was afraid that the certificate was fake and that Uncle Baichel only intended to deceive Taesang. Kanggi's suspicion was correct, as it turned out to be just a trick, by his uncle. He then chased the man and managed to catch him in a dead-end street. Uncle Baichel promised to reveal the whereabouts of Madame Hungja if he was given money.
너도 말고 한 장만 주쇼.
Kanggi was frustrated because Baichel had lied to him. Uncle Baichel was threatened and beaten, until he was finally forced to take Kanggi to Madame Hungja's place. Kanggi was in tears because he couldn't bear to imagine Taesang's expression if he knew the condition his mother was in right now. Kanggi actually felt sorry for Taesang's life, which continued to be full of hardship. He wanted the man to get married soon and forgive his mother so he could live in peace. Taesang has led a difficult life, even though he is a good person. Dongku also just found out a fact that Taesang always sent money to his mother in the village. Meanwhile, Seongjo received news that Taesang's younger brother, Taemin, might have already passed away. He then confirmed the news with Taemin's former school. The school admitted they received the news from someone who claimed to be close to Taemin. Seongjo felt sad because all this time Taesang had been hoping for his brother. He then lost focus while driving and got into an accident. Yongkap was the first person Seongjo contacted. He took care of the paperwork and drove Seongjo back to his house. While helping to tidy up Seongjo's house, Yongkap found a photo of Taesang and Taemin when they were young. Yongkap admitted to having visited Mrs. Youngja's shop and found a note left by Seongjo. Yongkap would do anything for the woman he loves, including destroying Taesang's family.
우린 이제 한 팀이야. 동생도 마주 찾자고.
That was opposed by Seongju. Yongkap instead plans to find someone to claim to be Daesang's younger sibling. Apparently, he wants revenge, because Daesang has trampled on his honor as a man. On the other hand, Midu tells his family about his plan to go abroad. His father agrees, but his mother firmly opposes it. Mrs. Sun Ae asks Midu to consider Daesang's feelings. Everything Midu has now is also due to that man's involvement.
사람의 탈을 쓰고 어떻게 네가 이래? 한 사장이 너한테 어떻게 했는데 네가 이래?
Midu's hesitation to leave grows even stronger, especially after receiving advice from a friend. Midu also reads a quote written by Dae-sang on the blackboard, hinting at a fear of separation. Midu expresses his reservations to Dae-sang. Unexpectedly, Dae-sang has prepared a proposal for her. Dae-sang allows Midu to leave for 2 years. He wants his beloved to return to marry him. This makes Midu feel relieved and able to leave without any burden.
고마워.
The next day, Midu departs for a business trip with Dae-sang and Jahi. Seeing Midu's worn-out shoes, Mrs. Sun Ae asks Midu to use another pair. Midu doesn't want to use the shoes given by Jahi to avoid misunderstandings. Without Midu's knowledge, Mrs. Sun Ae puts the shoes in her suitcase. During the trip, Dae-sang admits that he is dating Midu. Jahi pretends to be surprised, even though he has known about it for a long time.
아, 그럼 미도 씨 남친이
While relaxing, Midu receives a call that the Kelaju office has cancelled her work. Midu wants a detailed explanation because she didn't receive any prior notification. Midu suspects that this is Dae-sang's doing because she once saw him enter the Kelaju office. Midu is overwhelmed with sadness, and her tears won't stop falling. Jahi intends to cheer Midu up by placing flowers in front of her room. After thinking it over, he doesn't want to cause any misunderstandings, so he decides to cancel his plan. Unexpectedly, Midu opens the door just as Jahi is about to take back the flowers he brought. Jahi then hands the flowers to Midu and comforts her so she won't be sad anymore.
울지 말라고요.
As Midu is about to close the door, Jahi barges in and kisses her. Midu tries to break free from Jahi, and unexpectedly, Dae-sang rings Midu's doorbell. Both Midu and Jahi tremble with fear of being caught, and neither of them responds to Dae-sang's words from outside the door. As soon as Dae-sang leaves, Midu quickly asks Jahi to return to his room, but unexpectedly, Jahi opens the door just as Dae-sang is coming out of his room. Tense, Jahi explains that he was just going to take a wine class, back to his room. Dae-sang doesn't suspect a thing. Once in his room, Jahi feels guilty for having done something foolish. The next day, when heading to a meeting, Dae-sang finds Midu's worn-out shoes. He asks her to wear different shoes to show respect for the important client who will be visiting. Jahi realizes that Midu is wearing the shoes he gave her.
구두가 참 예쁘네요.
The client they were waiting for didn't show up, so Jahi took the initiative to call Songju. Jahi was angry because Songju had taken the client to another location. Songju defended himself by saying that he was no longer Dae-sang's business partner. The investors who came were part of his network. Songju had the right to take the investors from Dae-sang, considering they are now competitors.
이젠 아니잖아. 모르고 있었어요?
Dae-sang accepted it calmly, unlike Jahi who was emotional because Songju involved personal issues in a business matter. Jahi understood that Songju was actually hurt because of unrequited love. Jahi insisted on meeting Songju even though he was forbidden by Dae-sang.
그분이 사장님 사랑한 거 아셨죠?
Songju knew that Jahi liked Midu, so he shouldn't be helping Dae-sang. Jahi would hate Dae-sang even more if he knew the truth about why Kengi was imprisoned, as Kengi was merely scapegoated by Dae-sang at that time. Remembering that, Jahi was very angry. Actually, Songju regretted having taken petty revenge on Dae-sang. He just wanted Dae-sang to feel the heartbreak that he felt.
미안해.
Meanwhile, Midu asked about Taesung's visit to the Kelaju office, convinced that it was related to the cancellation of the work contract. Taesung tried to clear up this misunderstanding, but Midu seemed resigned, willing to do whatever Taesung wanted.
직원으로 뽑았으고 싶겠어?
That night, Taesung intended to apologize for what happened earlier. When visiting Midu's house, Taesung found that the attic was almost collapsing. Taesung then invited Midu's family to stay at his place until the repairs were completed. Everyone agreed except for Midu's father. He couldn't be persuaded at all because he couldn't forgive Taesung's past mistakes. Taesung realized that his mistake was indeed very serious, so he didn't deserve forgiveness from Midu's father.
아버님도 같이 가시죠.
난 됐네.
On the other hand, while cleaning the room, Kangi found a photo of Midu on Jahi's computer screen. He also noticed that Midu was wearing shoes given by Jahi when visiting the golden tree. Kangi asked Jahi to stop liking Midu. It's not good if Jahi and Taesang agree just because of a woman. Jahi instead challenged Kangi to tell him the reason he went to prison. Kangi promised that one day he would tell Jahi the truth.
태상이 형, 두 사람 때문에 버텼어.
Kangi planned to invite Jahi for a drink at Taesang's house. Initially, Taesang refused because he is now living with Midu's family. However, Kangi insisted and wanted to be introduced to them. Jahi was surprised because it was his first time going to Taesang's house. The situation became awkward between him and Midu.
그러고 보니까 쟤를 우리 집에 한 번도 초대한 적이 없었구나.
That night, Midu was contacted by Kalaju, who offered her a job in New York. Kalaju got this recommendation from Jahi, who pleaded for Midu to be given a contract to work at his company. Kalaju thought that Jahi was Midu's boyfriend because he seemed to be trying hard to have his request granted.
플러스 거는 유감이네. 나도 왜 갑자기 번복이 되는지 이해가 잘 안 갔어요.
If Midu accepted Kalaju's offer, Jahi decided to return to work in Hong Kong. Midu was a bit shaken upon hearing the news. Actually, she wanted to stop Jahi from leaving, but her heart told her that such an action was a big mistake. Knowing this, Jahi then pulled Midu into his embrace. Both of them couldn't hold back their overwhelming feelings. As they were about to engage in forbidden activities unexpectedly, Taesang returned home. Jahi tried to explain that he was only helping Midu to put up a frame. Taesang was a bit suspicious, especially seeing Jahi's slightly disheveled clothes. However, he tried to restrain himself from asking what really happened. The next day, Taesang's suspicions were confirmed when he found a shirt with Jahi's name on it, in his room. He felt very foolish for not realizing the signs that Midu and Jahi had a special relationship all along. In a state of rage, Taesang tore Jahi's shirt. When he met Midu, Taesang tried to control his emotions. He didn't discuss Midu's relationship with Jahi. He felt that Midu hadn't been happy all this time. Without Midu's knowledge, Taesang sent a package to Jahi containing the torn shirt. Jahi's body trembled violently, realizing that what he had done with Midu had been discovered. Jahi immediately sent a message to Midu about this. He was worried that Taesang might do something reckless, but Taesang only invited Midu to choose wedding attire. It turns out he wanted to speed up their wedding because he didn't want to lose Midu. Jahi's worries were unfounded, but he chose to return to South Korea to meet Taesang. Jahi admitted that he had liked Midu since their meeting in Hong Kong. According to Jahi, Midu was not a good match for Taesang. The girl should be with someone who is her equal and shares her views. If Taesang truly loved Midu, he should be willing to let her go.
잘 되게 해야죠. 나시아스트랑 손잡으면.
Taesang remained convinced that Midu had feelings for him, but Jahi was not sure about that. Jahi believed that Midu was staying only to repay Taesang's kindness. Taesang had now forgotten the incident the other day when Jahi's shirt was left in his room. Jahi was the most important person, so there should be no conflict between the two of them. Jahi, on the contrary, became more challenging towards Taesang in order to support the girl he loved.
미두 씨가 사장님을 사랑하는 거지.
After returning from his meeting with Taesang, Jahi stopped by Midu's bookstore. Unexpectedly, Midu was there and Jahi hugged her tightly. He couldn't stop worrying about the girl. Jahi admitted that he had told everything to Taesang. Midu then regretted Jahi's actions, which would only harm himself. Midu hoped Jahi would stop because she didn't want to betray Taesang again. Unexpectedly, the person they were talking about suddenly arrived. Jahi refused when asked to leave. He actually wanted to discuss their relationship in front of Taesang.
이제 나한테 다 맡겨. 내가 알아서 할 테니까.
그리고
After Midu pleaded, Jahi agreed to hide upstairs. Before leaving with Taesang, Midu followed Jahi upstairs. Midu warned Jahi to leave after Taesang's car had departed. Jahi then hugged Midu with a sense of regret. He should have had the courage to get to know Midu back then. Unbeknownst to them, Taesang saw the incident. Midu and Jahi were extremely shocked, but they managed to give an explanation. Without saying anything, Taesang immediately grabbed Midu's arm and hit Jahi. Taesang then took Midu back to his house. He tried to forgive the events of the other day and tonight, but he didn't want to hear anything from Midu's mouth. Taesang was worried that those words would hurt his heart. On the other hand, Midu was also afraid of her fate. She didn't know how long she could endure the situation. With great courage, Midu confessed her feelings for Jahi. Taesang ignored that because he wanted Midu to be with him and love only him.
난 널 내 여자라고 생각한다. 그날 밤일도 오늘도.
On the other hand, Jahi confessed to Jahi that he had told Taesang about Midu. Jahi was made angry because Jahi disobeyed his orders. Jahi's sacrifice seemed in vain if everything ended just like that. On one hand, he also felt sorry seeing Jahi suffer. Without Jahi's knowledge, Jahi asked Seongju about the events from 7 years ago. Together with Hyun Recap, Seongju twisted the facts and accused Taesang of scapegoating Jahi. Seongju did it to destroy Taesang, so he could protect Vatbria. Fortunately, Jahi wasn't quick to believe their words.
내가 그 말을 다 믿을 거라고는 생각하지 마십시오.
When Taesang was not at home, Jahi came to visit Midu. Jahi's intention to elope with Midu was eventually thwarted. Midu didn't want that to endanger Jahi because Taesang would not let it go unpunished, and without realizing it, their actions were caught on Taesang's camera that was still on. Upon returning home, Taesang realized that he had forgotten to turn off his camera. Taesang then replayed the recording on it. Unexpectedly, he saw the video of Midu's meeting with Jahi. Taesang's heart was truly hurt to the point where he couldn't control himself. Taesang went into a rage after watching the recording. Midu, who heard him from the room, felt scared. She pretended to be asleep when Taesang entered her room. Taesang vented his anger by driving at high speed. Unexpectedly, his car tire burst, causing the car to lose balance. Fortunately, Taesang quickly braked, so he didn't crash into the road barrier. The incident left a deep trauma for Taesang. He decided to stay at a countryside villa and cut off communication to find peace. Everyone at the office was looking for him, including Jahi. He asked Midu about Taesang's whereabouts, but the officer didn't know anything. Jahi asked Midu to stay away from Jahi and not to play with Taesang's feelings. Midu was a bit offended because all this time he had tried to be sincere with Taesang. However, Midu still couldn't fully give his heart to Taesang. He apparently found comfort in Jahi.
갖고 논 적 없고 저도 진심이었습니다.
Upon arriving home, Jahi scolded Jahi for his careless behavior. Jahi remained stubborn, remembering that he would eventually leave Golden Tree once the deal with the Hong Kong investor was finalized. After searching everywhere, Jahi finally found Taesang's whereabouts. He was very worried about Taesang, but the man showed that he was doing just fine.
타이어가 펑크나요? 다친 데는 없으세요?
괜찮아.
Accidentally, Jahi found Taesang's camera while helping to tidy up. He played the recording inside, which began with Taesang monologuing to express his feelings of love for Midu. The end of the recording was very shocking to Jahi. He couldn't contain his anger after seeing the recording of Midu with Jahi. Taesang seemed to be in shock after watching that recording. Kengi then blamed Jahi and Midu for everything that happened.
잠깐 봬요. 집 근처로 갈게요.
That evening, Taesang attended a meeting with Midu's family at a restaurant as there was something important he wanted to discuss. Apparently, Taesang decided to stay outside of Seoul and allowed Midu's family to stay at his house until things were resolved. Midu also mentioned that she postponed her plans to marry Taesang to accept an offer from Kalaju. Unlike usual, Taesang actually let Midu go and would soon process his resignation. Taesang didn't want to become a monster who held Midu back forever. He felt this decision was better than having Midu think about someone else while being with him.
진짜 좋아하는 사람을 찾아가야죠.
Midu chased after Taesang to return the engagement ring. Taesang instead asked Midu to sell it because he no longer needed the ring. He already considered Midu's debt settled, so she shouldn't feel burdened. If asked to express his true feelings, Taesang wished Midu would disappear from this world. He never felt this much pain, and even his hopeless life was far better than after he met Midu. No matter how good Taesang's actions were, Midu still considered him a bad person. Taesang felt humiliated to the point where his life seemed meaningless.
차라리 네가 죽었으면 좋겠다.
Day by day, Taesang's body grew more lethargic and appeared unkempt. Kangita thus saw Taesang as if he had lost himself. He didn't want Taesang to end up like this and promised to restore everything to how it was before. Kangi apparently planned something bad for Midu. He threatened to spread the video recording of Midu and Jahi. If he didn't want that to happen, then Midu was asked to explain everything. Kangi arranged their meeting in a remote place because he intended to hit Midu without anyone knowing, not expecting a remote place to explain everything.
다른 사람도 아닌 태상이 형인데.
Once upon a time, Midu arrived at the agreed location when it was already late, and he started looking for the house mentioned by Jahi, but he couldn't find it. Jahi had turned off his phone, so Midu contacted Taesang. Unfortunately, Priya didn't answer the call, and as Midu turned around, a car sped towards him. The car driven by Jahi hit Midu, causing her body to be thrown. Jahi immediately fled, as soon as he noticed another car nearby. After hearing the news that Midu had an accident, Taesang rushed to the hospital, deeply shaken by the incident. Midu's father was angry and accused Taesang of hiring a criminal to harm his daughter. If anything happens to Midu, Mr. Kyungwook will not hesitate to take Taesang's life. Suddenly, Taesang thought that it was highly likely Jahi was the perpetrator. He remembered Jahi's last words about returning everything to how it was before Midu's presence. Taesang and Midu's family waited anxiously, and Jahi, who was also there, couldn't hide his worry. As soon as Midu regained consciousness, she and Taesang immediately went into the recovery room. The first thing Midu did was hold Taesang's hand tightly. Midu didn't remember anything about the events of the previous night, and she didn't even recognize Jahi. According to the doctor, Midu has lost her short-term memory, and this condition could recover within a few months.
사고 충격으로 혼란을 겪는 경우는 아주 많습니다.
Midu needs to focus on the recovery of her leg, which is paralyzed due to a dislocated joint. Midu is worried that the paralysis in her leg will last a long time or even become permanent. Taesang tries to cheer Midu up by inviting her on a vacation with the family. When Taesang mentioned the name Hong Kong, Midu didn't remember ever visiting it. Midu's phone, which had malfunctioned after being thrown, was eventually repaired. Midu saw many call logs to Jahi's number on the night of the accident, so she called back. At that time, Midu asked about the possible reason she called Jahi, but the fairy claimed not to know anything. Midu had hoped that information from Jahi could help her remember or find the perpetrator. Taesang asked Midu not to force herself to remember everything because it could endanger her health. Without Midu's knowledge, Taesang deleted Jahi's call history from her phone. Meanwhile, Jahi still hasn't given up on restoring Midu's memory. He bombarded Midu with many questions and showed her photos of their past together. Midu felt uncomfortable and asked Taesang to tell Jahi to leave.
무슨 얘긴데요?
Jahi was asked to focus on business in Hong Kong while Taesang would take care of Midu. Without objection, Jahi accused Taesang of being the hit-and-run perpetrator, which Taesang denied having committed such a vile act. Taesang's suspicion towards Jahi grew stronger. Without hesitation, Jahi confessed to all his actions. He did it because he couldn't bear to see Taesang heartbroken, and Jahi was grateful that Midu didn't remember Jahi. Things could return to the way he wanted.
난 세상에 태상 형이랑 제이뿐인데.
Taesang would keep quiet about this, but Jahi had to be careful since Jahi was already investigating the perpetrator. Meanwhile, Sungkoo received news that Taesang's younger sibling was still alive. It was discovered that the man had been adopted by a businessman living in Hong Kong unexpectedly. That businessman was a prospective investor in Golden Tree. After meeting with Jahi, Sungkoo visited Midu in the hospital. Midu was confused because Sungkoo's face seemed unfamiliar to her. Sungkoo's visit could complicate matters further, especially if she said something wrong. Immediately, Taesang asked Sungkoo to leave the hospital.
무명하셔서 고마워요.
Unexpectedly, Sungkoo found out about Midu's accident the night before. Sungkoo suspected that Taesang had ordered Jahi to hit the girl, because she had seen Jahi around the scene with rather suspicious behavior. Taesang then got angry and wanted to silence Sungkoo to stop her from speaking carelessly. However, without realizing it, Midu's father heard their entire conversation. After being allowed to go home from the hospital, Midu was invited to go on vacation by Taesang. She enjoyed the fresh air even though she had to move around with the help of a wheelchair. When Midu was relaxing alone at the peak, Jahi suddenly came to visit. Jahi could not forgive Midu's betrayal of Taesang and her affair with Jahi. Jahi also believed that Midu was pretending to have lost her memory to plan her next move. He would not allow Midu to toy with Taesang again.
학비를 주고 돌봐준 태상형의 은혜를 저버리고
Midu was taken further up so that he couldn't be found by Taesang and his friends. While trying to go down by himself, Midu couldn't control his wheelchair, causing him to slip and fall unconscious. Raindrops woke Midu up, and he tried to get out of that place, but he couldn't move his legs. Midu felt he was being punished for betraying Taesang's feelings.
다른 사람을 좋아한 거지 내가.
Meanwhile, Taesang met Chani when he intended to pick up Midu. He became suspicious that Chani had done various things to the person he loved dearly. Without wasting any time, Taesang immediately searched for Midu in all directions. Fortunately, Taesang was able to find him quickly. Strangely, however, Midu appeared frightened and kept apologizing. The next day, Midu realized that Taesang was sleeping next to him. Midu reminded Taesang about their obligation to maintain boundaries before marriage, which was mentioned during a business trip with Jahi. Midu's words made Taesang realize that Midu's memory had actually been altered. Taesang then recalled Chani's words about Midu pretending to be paralyzed and having lost his memory. He intended to prove it himself as time went on. Like Taesang, Jahi also knew that Midu was hiding his true condition for reasons that were not yet clear. Jahi entrusted a poster to Midden to be put up in Midu's room, along with a short message. After that meeting, Jahi caught Taesang and Chani having an intense conversation. He felt that the two of them were hiding something.
이유가 뭡니까? 네 밥 해주라고 이 새끼야.
On the other hand, the poster from Jahi caught Midu's eye. After reading the message, Midu quickly took the poster down from the wall to avoid being discovered by Taesang. Unexpectedly, when trying to reach for the poster, Midu found that he could move his legs. He was also able to stand firmly as before. Midu couldn't hide his happiness. He immediately went outside when his mother called him to gather in the living room. At the same time, Midu's father came to meet Taesang. He admitted to overhearing Taesang's conversation with Sungju at the hospital. Taesang was asked by Midu to turn himself into the police, but Midu stopped him because he remembered the night of the accident he experienced. Unexpectedly, Midu gave false testimony when he was interrogated by the police. Midu mentioned that the color of the car that hit him was white, which contradicted the witness's statement. The color of the car seen by the witness was black or gray.
검정이나 짙은 회색이라고 했는데요.
그분이 잘못 봤겠죠.
The next day, Midu arranged a meeting with Jahi in a park. He told the perpetrator not to worry and blames Taesang. Midu was not honest, claiming Kengi was the perpetrator to protect Jahi's feelings. Meanwhile, Midu's father was still not satisfied with his daughter's testimony. He asked Jahi for help to find out the truth about the perpetrator. When Kengi's name was mentioned, Jahi was very shocked. He also felt worried if Kengi was indeed the perpetrator.
이창희가 누군가 그럼?
The suspicion was confirmed when the apartment manager informed them about Kengi's car being in the parking lot. Jahi saw that the car was severely damaged, as if it had been used to hit something. Senju also confirmed this, as he had seen Kengi near the scene before the incident. Meanwhile, Midu's shoes appeared dirty, as if they had stepped on something. Taesang investigated the matter, including checking the TV footage from the place Midu likely visited. The footage showed that Midu had just met with Jahi. That night, Taesang prepared a surprise birthday celebration for Midu. He gave her a gift in the form of a pair of shoes, and asked Midu to walk towards him wearing the new shoes he had just given her. Midu couldn't resist Taesang's insistence, so she complied with his request. All this time, she had been hiding her condition to protect Jahi.
날 죽이려고 했잖아.
Midu's words increasingly emphasize how deep her feelings of love are for Jahi. In desperation, Taesang decided to let go of Midu and return her to Jahi. Midu rejected that decision because she wanted to stay with Taesang. She will try to love Bria. Taesang doesn't want to see Midu continue to suffer and live in lies while with him. On the other hand, Jahi found out that Dongku embezzled company money to play the stock market. Dongku was asked to return the money immediately if he didn't want to go to jail. The difficult position forced Dongku to borrow a significant amount of money from Yongkap. Yongkap then complained to Jahi about Dongku, who was always favored by Taesang. Dongku was influenced by Yongkap's words, which sparked hatred in his heart towards Jahi. Boldly, Dongku challenged Jahi, who intended to report him to Taesang and the company's investigation team. The two of them got into a fight. Dongku couldn't match Jahi's strength, who beat him mercilessly. Jahi actually didn't want this conflict to happen because he considered Dongku like a brother.
그만해라, 이 새끼야.
When Jahi was off guard, Dongku threw cement at his face, causing Jahi's foot to slip and fall from a height. Dongku didn't expect his actions to have fatal consequences. He didn't want Jahi to get seriously injured from their fight. Dongku didn't know what to do, especially when Taesang arrived at the scene. At that moment, Dongku instead ran as fast as he could to his hiding place. Taesang found Jahi already unconscious with his head covered in wounds. He immediately took the man to the hospital to receive medical treatment. Fortunately, Jahi was able to get through the critical period, although he has not yet woken up from the coma. The doctor conveyed the worst possibility that Jahi might face, which is brain damage. The bad news about Jahi also reached Jahi's ears. Taesang was accused of being the perpetrator, but he continued to deny it. Taesang had no idea why Jahi could have fallen in the construction area. Without Taesang's knowledge, Dongku had been trying to hide his guilt and fear of being found out. Taesang remembered what Kangi had said some time ago. If something happened to Kangi, Taesang was asked to go to his house and open his grandmother's photo frame. There, Kangi wrote a letter about the secret he was hiding from Jahi. In fact, Jahi was not Kangi's biological sibling. Jahi is the child of a Hong Kong businessman named Mr. Ji Myung, who had wronged Rui Zhang's father. His selfishness all this time had placed Jahi in a situation full of suffering. He didn't want to return Jahi to his biological parents because he didn't want to live alone after his grandmother passed away.
제이를 떠나보내기도 싫었습니다.
If only Kangi had introduced Jahi to Mr. Ji Myung back then, his life might have been happier. That regret made Kangi determined to provide Jahi with a higher education so that one day his father would be proud. Taesang learned from what Kangi had experienced. Selfishness will only make Mido appear more pitiful. Before Mido said goodbye from his home, Taesang apologized for having given him difficult times. After going through everything with Mido, Taesang began to doubt his feelings. He also couldn't control himself when he was consumed by anger. Taesang's temperamental nature apparently made Mido even more afraid, but he also felt sorry for the outburst.
미안했어요.
The letter written by Changyi not only contained information about Jahi, but also conveyed details about Mrs. Hongja and her current whereabouts. Gathering his courage, Taesang visited Mrs. Hongja's shop. Taesang shed tears from the moment he took his first bite of food. It had been a long time since he tasted his mother's cooking, and the longing was immense, but Taesang couldn't express it. Mrs. Hongja recognized her son's voice, but she hesitated to greet him. In the end, Mrs. Hongja couldn't hold back her tears when Taesang paid with a large sum of money. Meanwhile, after returning from taking care of Changyi at the hospital, Jahi found Taesang's phone at his house. Taesang explained that his purpose for going to Jahi's house was to read a letter from Changyi. Jahi was given the choice to read the letter or listen to it directly when Changyi regained consciousness. The letter was apparently very important because it was related to Jahi.
나중에 창희한테 듣거나 편지는 직접 봐.
Taesang's request was rejected by Jahi, who was still enveloped in hatred. The anger and resentment Jahi felt towards Taesang made it almost impossible for him to think rationally. At this point, Jahi doesn't need to worry because Taesang has ended his relationship with Midu. Taesang actually wants Jahi to take good care of the girl. That good news certainly lifted Jahi's spirits. He immediately went to see Midu with an enthusiastic feeling. Even at that moment, Jahi wasn't afraid of getting scolded by Mrs. Sunai.
셋이 일단 가요.
너 때문이야. 다 너 때문이야.
죄송합니다.
Midu was invited to visit Changi in the hospital. Unexpectedly, they ran into Tae-sang, who wanted to check on Changi's condition. Jahi was asked to tell Tae-sang to leave and not to come to the hospital again. Tae-sang hadn't had a chance to move from his position when the police arrived to arrest Changi. Jahi couldn't accept Changi being pursued again. He then asked for help from Songju and Youngkap to prove that Tae-sang was the one at fault. Youngkap immediately refused because he didn't want to get involved and risk going to jail. Unlike Songju, who actually agreed to it. However, he set conditions that Jahi had to meet. Jahi was asked to offer Mr. Ji Myung to acknowledge the Golden Tree side. Initially, Mr. Ji Myung and Roy Jang were shocked when they heard the offer. However, Jahi managed to convince them. Jahi argued that he was doing this because Tae-sang would soon be investigated by the authorities for a certain case. Roy Jang was then sent to Korea to meet Tae-sang in person.
한태상 사장님께는 투자 실사단 미팅으로만 얘기했습니다.
Tae-sang was not yet aware that Roy Jang was Taemin. He acted normally and welcomed the man warmly. Tae-sang was asked to guide the trip while Roy Jang was in South Korea. While having a meal together, Tae-sang shared that he actually has a younger sibling. They were separated for over a decade due to a certain issue. Tae-sang reminisced about his experiences with his younger sibling. They often went to buy tteokbokki at the restaurant that Roy Jang is visiting now. Tae-sang has tried to find his siblings' whereabouts, but so far he hasn't found them. However, Tae-sang will not give up and continues to hold on to hope that they will meet again.
혹시라도 안 좋은 소식을 들으면 무너져 버릴 것 같아서요.
After dropping off Roy Jang, Tae-sang met with Jahi to inform him about Jangi's letter. Jahi finally learned the fact that Jangi is not his biological brother. Jahi couldn't believe it because all this time Jangi had been so loving and caring towards him, as if they were biological siblings. That fact was too painful for him. Jahi refused when asked to read the letter directly. He hoped Jangi would soon come to his senses and explain everything that happened.
내 목소리 들리지?
Tae-sang was disappointed with Jahi's selfish and indifferent attitude. All this time, he had misjudged Jahi, who turned out to be very problematic. Tae-sang was indeed a criminal, but he didn't dwell on revenge like Jahi. He actually felt sorry for Jangi because he had been sacrificing for Audi all along. Jahi considered his life to be a mess now because of Tae-sang. And without Tae-sang's knowledge, Jahi wanted to take revenge by ruining his life. Jahi refused when asked to read his letter.
사장님 어머니가 계신 곳을 아신다고?
On the other hand, the building occupied by the Midu family has secretly been purchased by Songju. Midu's father was asked to vacate the building at the end of the month. The father requested a contract extension, but it was not granted, especially since they often delayed rent payments. Midu's father was also troubled because it was difficult to find another place. If Midu were still dating Tae-sang, they wouldn't be experiencing this. Midu asked her mother to be patient and continue searching for a place the next day. Upon arriving home, Tae-sang was already waiting at the bookstore to meet Midu. Tae-sang handed over a letter from Changi for her to read. He wanted Midu to convey the contents of the letter to Jahi because the man didn't want to hear it.
거짓말 편지를 가지고 널 만나러 올 이유가 없잖아.
Before going home, Tae-sang bought a few books at Midu's store. Tae-sang's money was not accepted by the oligarch because those books were nothing compared to everything Tae-sang had given to their family. Tae-sang asked Midu not to feel guilty and to live her life with Jahi. Midu immediately conveyed Tae-sang's message to Jahi. Midu also informed that Lord Jim Young is Jahi's biological father. Jahi did not take those words at face value. Instead, she got angry because Midu was still communicating with Tae-sang.
만나는 것 자체가 버거워요 나한테.
When about to go for dinner, Midu found a DNA test report on the car seat. Jahi explained that it was related to Tae-sang and Taemin. Midu wanted Jahi to inform Tae-sang immediately, considering that he had been searching for his sibling for a long time. Jahi refused the request because Tae-sang was the one who caused Kungi to be hospitalized. Midu regretted Jahi's attitude, which had now changed. The hatred consuming Jahi made it impossible for her to distinguish between right and wrong. Jahi instead planned to trap Tae-sang by taking away what the man had achieved.
어머니보다 동생을 더 찾고 싶어 했던 거 알잖아요.
Unexpectedly, Tae-sang's secretary had realized something was off with Jahi. Since securing the agreement from Roy Jang, Jahi contacted all the board members to support her decision to sell Golden Tree. Jahi's true intentions were already known by Roy Jang. He assumed that Jahi held a grudge against Tae-sang because of a woman. Quietly, Roy Jang asked his subordinates to investigate Jahi. When asked for his opinion, Lord Simyong requested Roy Jang to protect Tae-sang, who is his only sibling. Lord Simyong advised Roy Jang to forgive Tae-sang soon. On one hand, Roy Jang hated Tae-sang, but on the other hand, he felt sorry for his brother.
형이 밉고 불쌍해요.
Tae-sang's visit to her shop made Mrs. Hongjia tremble because she was reminded of her past mistakes. Unexpectedly, Tae-sang was warm and did not bring up the matter. Tae-sang asked about Taemin, but Mrs. Hongjia did not know his whereabouts. The woman mentioned that there was a customer who claimed to be Taemin. Unfortunately, at that time she didn't dare to confirm it. At the same time, Youngcap suddenly arrived. Mrs. Hongjia recognized him as the person who brought Taemin to the shop. Tae-sang was angered because Youngcap brought a fake Taemin to play with his family. Meanwhile, while looking at a house to rent, Midu caught Roy Jang standing in front of a house. Midu apparently recognized the house as Tae-sang's old house. Midu immediately visited Tae-sang at the construction site to inform him of what she had just seen. Unexpectedly, a heavy object fell from above. Midu quickly pushed Tae-sang to prevent him from being hit by the object. Midu's knee was injured, so Tae-sang insisted on taking her to the hospital. At that moment, Midu refused because her wound could be treated with antiseptic. Instead, she expressed her purpose for coming to see Tae-sang. Jahi, who happened to be there, apparently prevented Midu from telling the truth. Midu then warned Jahi not to disrupt Tae-sang's family. After arguing with Jahi, Midu decided to go home and treat her knee. Tae-sang couldn't bear to see Midu walking with an injured leg. Midu was forced to get into the car so they could get home quickly. Unfortunately, their journey was hindered by traffic and road repairs. Tae-sang stopped in front of a pharmacy to buy antiseptic so Midu's wound wouldn't get worse. That small gesture of care made Midu unable to hide her smile. Midu took this opportunity to inform that Roy Jang is Tae-sang's brother. Midu wasn't joking about something so important. She had evidence, one of which was the incident this morning when Roy Jang visited Tae-sang's old house. Midu wasn't entirely sure yet, so Tae-sang was asked to investigate further.
그냥 혹시 그 사람이
To prove it, Tae-sang immediately flew to Hong Kong to meet Mr. Jin Myung. Unexpectedly, Liao already knew that Tae-sang is Roy Jang's sibling. According to Mr. Jin Myung, Roy Jang has his own reasons for not telling Tae-sang until now.
로이가 얘기해 줄 거예요.
Tae-sang also handed over the business card that Mr. Jin Myung had once given to Jangi. Tae-sang then invited Mr. Jin Myung to South Korea to be reunited with his biological child. Once conscious, Jangi will explain the reason why he didn't hand over the sewing earlier. Unexpectedly, as Tae-sang was saying goodbye, Mr. Jin Myung suffered a heart attack. Meanwhile, Jangi kept his promise to introduce Songju to Roy Jang. Songju was enraged when he found out that Jangi planned to sell the Golden Tree to Roy Jang's company, as it did not align with their original plan. Songju indeed wanted to see Tae-sang lose everything, but he felt this method was too harsh. On the other hand, Dongku decided he would confess to all his actions. Youngcap forbade Dongku from doing so because it would only harm him. If Tae-sang found out, Dongku could be imprisoned or treated even worse. Youngcap instead suggested poisoning Jangi so that the real facts wouldn't be revealed, keeping Tae-sang as the suspect. Youngcap's words ignited Dongku's anger. He refused to do what Youngcap ordered because Jangi was more valuable. Dongku hoped Jangi would wake up soon so he could apologize. When Jangi opened his eyes, Dongku felt happy, regretted his actions, and begged for forgiveness. As soon as he got the news, Jangi immediately headed to the hospital. Jangi explained the cause of his fall from the construction site. Initially, Jangi didn't believe it, but Dongku explained the chronology in detail. It was Tae-sang who actually took Jangi to the hospital.
저놈은 저거 무서워서 도망갔대.
Jahi also confirmed what Tae-sang said about the letter he left behind. Jahi had always loved his brother and was willing to do anything for him, including harming Midu. In the end, Jahi discovered the truth about the hit and run that affected Midu. Jahi did it of his own volition, not under Tae-sang's orders, just like the incident 7 years ago. Jahi wasn't scapegoated by Tae-sang because it was indeed he who took the life of the gangstar boss. Jahi regretted that Jahi was too trusting of Yonka's words. He also felt sympathy for Tae-sang because he had been cornered and deeply hated by Jahi all this time.
사람들이 널 그렇게 거짓말로 갖고 놀아? 내가 너 그렇게 키웠어?
Meanwhile, Tae-sang tried to forgive Mrs. Hongja. He had come to understand his mother's past situation and wanted to start anew. Mrs. Hongja cried tears of joy because Tae-sang had accepted her back. After returning from a picnic with his mother, Tae-sang was asked to go to the police station to provide a statement regarding the discovery of a skull on a mountain. The skull belonged to Song-joon, a man who once lived with Mrs. Hongja. Tae-sang was suspected because he was the last person to meet the man.
두 분 사이에 실랑이가 있었던 걸 술집 주인이 기억합니다.
Song-joon did not want to remain silent and wanted to protect Tae-sang. He also talked about Roy Jang and the golden tree that was sold by Jahi. Tae-sang already knew about it, but he didn't mind. Consider the golden tree as a gift for Roy Jang. Song-joon felt sorry for Tae-sang, who never experienced a happy life. He loved the man very much and hoped to marry him to alleviate the loneliness he felt. Without hesitation, Tae-sang agreed to Song-joon's request. With a joyful heart, Song-joon immediately prepared everything needed for their wedding. He knew that this day would come, where Tae-sang would accept him with open arms.
당신도 나 포기하고 좋은 여자 만나.
The wedding plans of Sung-ju and Tae-sang are opposed by Yeon-cap. With a face full of hatred, Yeon-cap intends to prepare a surprising gift for their wedding day. Yeon-cap is forced to explain what kind of gift he means. He admits that he was a witness to the incident when Tae-sang got into a fight with Sung-jun. In a drunken state, Sung-jun hit Tae-sang with a rock until he passed out. Sung-jun himself was walking somewhat unsteadily and accidentally slipped and fell down the stairs, and Sung-jun's life could not be saved. Kang-gi, upon discovering this, immediately carried Sung-jun's body and buried it in the mountains. Afraid that Tae-sang would be blamed, Kang-gi did not realize that his actions were actually witnessed by Yeon-cap. Yeon-cap was asked by Sung-ju to provide an honest statement to the police, but he refused.
내가 이런 얘기를 왜 지어내겠어?
The news about Tae-sang being blamed made Midukian worried, and he suddenly thought about the remaining letter from Kang-gi that Tae-sang did not show. Tae-sang refused to disclose the rest of the letter because it was related to Kang-gi's privacy. Midu just wanted to help clear Tae-sang's name, feeling guilty for having misjudged him. At the same time, Sung-ju arrived and Tae-sang announced their engagement. Midu was a bit shaken by the news, but he tried not to show a clear reaction.
서미도 씨, 여기 웬일이죠?
별일 아니었어요.
The bad news about Tae-sang also reached Kang-gi's ears. He didn't wait long to meet Mr. Jim Young and reveal everything. Kang-gi also explained why he hadn't informed about Jahi's whereabouts earlier. Kang-gi wanted to ask Mr. Jim Young to take care of Jahi from now on. He would soon turn himself in to the authorities and confess to being the one who buried Sung-ju.
우리 제이 잘 부탁드립니다.
The police's decision to make Tae-sang a suspect had an impact on the company. Tae-sang was asked to step down by the board. Roy Jang remembered Mr. Jim Young's words to protect Tae-sang without harming Jahi. He decided to withdraw from sponsorship even though Jahi would replace Tae-sang's position. From the beginning, Roy Jang only wanted to invest or buy the company if Tae-sang remained its president.
이 회사를 만들고 키운 사람이니까요.
After attending the meeting, Roy Jang was invited by Tae-sang to Madame Hongja's shop. He was introduced to the woman who couldn't hide her happiness at being able to reunite with her second child. Roy Jang tried to avoid it, but his longing for Madame Hongja could no longer be contained. He allowed his mother to sink into his embrace. In the end, Tae-sang decided to resign from Golden Tree. he would hand over the company to Roy Jang. Tae-sang believed that his younger brother could manage the company well.
엄마를 안아줘서 고맙다.
Meanwhile, Jahi was introduced to Mr. Jim Young for the first time. He couldn't believe that he still had parents. Considering that all this time, he had only lived with his grandmother and Kangi, Mr. Jim Young also never expected this to happen in his life. Now he has 4 children, namely Roy Jang, Tae-sang, Jahi, and Kangi. Unfortunately, Jahi refused to live with Mr. Jim Young because he found it hard to part with Kangi. Jahi wanted to thank Kangi for raising him sincerely.
아버지를 만나서
Midu postponed her departure to New York to attend Taesong's wedding party. Jahi realized that Midu still had feelings for Bria. Like it or not, Taesang once had a place in Midu's heart. Unexpectedly, Taesong's wedding failed because Songju, the bride, never showed up. Songju made a deal with Youngkap. If Songju cancelled the wedding, then Youngkap would provide testimony on Songjuin's case. Songju did this because she loved Taesang too much. She didn't want Taesang to live a difficult life like before.
태성 씨 미안해.
2 years later, Midu completed a contract from New York. She found that her old building had been turned into a bookstore. She didn't know yet that Taesang was the one who opened the bookstore. Nida left a quote on the available chalkboard. Accidentally, Taesang read that quote. And the next day, Midu read another quote, which made her even more certain that it was Taesang who wrote it.
칠판 걸린 것도 그대로야.
Nida waited in the bookstore until she felt sleepy. She was grateful she didn't leave the place because she finally got to meet Taesang again. The two of them decided to start their life story from the beginning, and the film ended.